on this map. Kind of in the area where you see Lowry, Granbury, Govan, Claiborne's division on the map. Although I will tell you that there is still a lot to learn from about the battle, the fine details of exactly who was where. Now that more of this property is accessible, I think folks will be able to do some more of the research and figure it out more specifically. The Confederate line develops here in general, as you see on this map, on the beginning late on the 13th and then through the 14th. However, what you see here in front of you and the other earthworks that you see on the Confederate positions that survive today here at Resaca, almost all of those earthworks were not constructed into that form until the night of May the 14th and the early morning hours of May the 15th. As a result of mostly Union artillery fire on May 14th, the Confederates, after dark on May 14th, figured we better dig. And they did. The earthworks that were constructed late on the 13th and early on the 14th, in most cases, were simply rails and logs thrown up with some dirt thrown over them. They were not very extensive. But as a result of pounding from Union artillery, which got position on the tops of some of those hills over there on May 14th, sometimes able to enfilade these lines, the Confederates on the night of the 14th, early on the 15th, dug down into the ground. There's even a great story about, as some of you all know, an extensive religious revival revived in the Army of Tennessee in the winter of 63-64. It actually started earlier. It actually is an extension of a religious revival that had begun in the United States in the late 1850s. I'm sorry? The Second Great Awakening. This is later than that. Right, this is later than that. There, in the late 1850s, there was a big revival movement that began to sweep the United States. In some ways, you can say that the Civil War interrupts that revival movement, or that the Civil War, since there was such religious sentiment about the war itself, the Civil War just became another manifestation of that religious revival. And Steve Woodworth's God Goes Marching On. Who's our guy? George Rabel. Bob Miller. Yeah, George Rabel's God's Almost Chosen People. I believe that religion has been written way too out of mid-19th century history. But anyway, as a result of the religious revival, this one company, feeling that they should keep the Sabbath, and since the 14th was a Saturday and Sunday was the 15th, on the night of the 14th, they are digging and digging and digging, and as midnight came, they quit digging. And there was a difference in the earthworks in that regiment section. One company, keeping the Sabbath, quit digging at midnight on the 14th, beginning of the 15th.
I'd like to know what England like that.
Well, the story is that because they didn't dig so deep, the next day a Union artillery projectile penetrated their more limited parapet, but it went underneath their trench, not into their trench.
There is a guy.
But these earthworks, as we see them today, are really the product of the night of May the 14th, the early morning hours of May the 15th. Also, as I described on the bus, think about the Confederate position here overlooking Camp Creek Valley. Think about them taking advantage of a whole series of fingers that stick out into the Camp Creek Valley. And most of these lines of earthworks are draped over the ends of these fingers. Now, this particular one, because the way the hill runs, isn't really just draped over the end of it, as those are on that hill, and most of those on the next hill to the south of it, and others to the north. This one kind of runs across the crest, but look at how this hill is shaped. It's kind of like if I had a broken finger, and that it's bent down, and they've run this along there, because where are the Federals? Look over there through the trees. We can actually see more than I thought we'd be able to. The earthworks here survive in segments. There really aren't any between the Oostenaula River and that first hill that I've started pointing them out on in the park here. And then these next 3 hills, this one being the third, got earthworks on the top of them. A little bit further to the north, we go through a place where there's been extensive timbering. The very first time I saw these works, right after the state of Georgia acquired the property, before they'd done anything at all to it, the earthworks up there where the timbering has since occurred were in fair shape. Now they're almost all obliterated. It's very, very hard to follow through that section. But then beyond there, they pick up again and are in pretty good shape. These main lines of Confederate works in most cases are not really tested. The Federals really don't get beyond Camp Creek in the valley here. In some other places, you'll find the traverses that we saw at Mill Creek Gap. We'll find them extensively used as well, but that again is dependent really upon where the earthworks are. Are they in particular enfiladed by Union artillery? There's one section up here further to the north that I can put the 9th Kentucky and another part of Lewis's brigade on the ground really specifically. In fact, some of you all may be familiar with a book entitled The Diary of a Confederate Soldier, John Jackman, 9th Kentucky. It's a great diary. He describes an incident where he is sitting on along a line of works that's going down into some low ground. He's looking across at the line of works of his same regiment coming out of the low ground, and a Federal artillery projectile comes into that line on the other side and causes casualties. And I can take you to probably within just yards of where Jackman was sitting, and where on the other side that Federal shell came in and devastated the Confederates on that side. So there's some really great earthworks here. There are 7 miles of trail here, and you can certainly come and hike and work off your fried chicken lunch. But the trail system is, if you're just coming here to visit the battlefield, the trail system's of marginal use. I don't lead groups in any more rainy death marches, because I've been down here enough now and figured out ways to shortcut, but it is a battlefield that's easier to visit in the winter than in the summer.
Really?
Well, the creek during the battle, there had been a really heavy rainstorm on the night of May the 10th, early on May the 11th. The creek wasn't bank full or out of its banks or anything, but there was a fair amount of water in Camp Creek. They had to wade across. It's probably only like knee deep or so, but they had to wade across it. It was a significant obstacle. The Federals will make several attacks into Camp Creek Valley from the hills on the other side, but most of these attacks don't go very far. They aren't pressed home. One reason is there isn't a lot of coordination. Rob Girardi can tell us William P. Carlin has a less than flattering account of their effort down here into the valley. They don't get any support on either flank. They
stay long.
I'm sorry.
Doesn't stay long.
They don't stay long. They advance into the maelstrom the open valley. The flat valley was clear. There were woods on the most of the hills, although some of these fingers, some of the ends of some of these fingers were open, and the Confederate works were right at the ends of those fingers, the edge of the woods on those fingers. So it's a neat site to visit, but it is one that you've got to really visit on foot. Tony, anything you want to add here?
I think you covered everything, Jim. The artillery bombardment was so bad that Cheatham was heard to say that night, the 14th, boys, we're going to be here another day. Get down on the ground as deep as you can.
Yeah.
And that's what they proceeded to do.
Yeah, the Federal.
Standing here, the Confederates are wondering all something suspicious over red. They're on the military crest right here, not the top of the mountain.
Yeah, although that does vary along the whole length of the line. In some places they're on the geographic crest and some on the military crest. Well, the ends of some of these fingers were open, and the Confederate works were either out on the entirely in the open area, or works were right at the end of the woods. In other places, the entire finger was wooded. Almost all of the hills where the Union troops are were wooded. And across the valley on some of those hilltops, there are surviving Union works. But there are a lot less. They're not as well developed, mainly because the Confederates weren't firing as much at those. Kurt?
How many on each side once everybody back?
Well, this is